Today, it's my great pleasure to welcome Pamela Wagner to the Eye of Power podcast. Quite a lot of life in her. She's still pretty young, so she's been able to pack a lot in so far in her journey. She started working at Google and put herself through a master's psychology through extension of Harvard and has traveled the world, has spent time in over 100 countries. She has her own digital ad agency, Ajala Digital, and she's helped over 3,000 companies with their ad performance on Google and other places. And she is somebody who really recognizes the whole human equation, whether it be in the world of work and how we navigate through this world together. And so we get into a bunch of different topics about how we can best do that and maybe some of the things to keep in mind as we either approach our own work, our stress levels, how we move in the world, really. She starts talking a little bit about that too. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Pamela Wagner to the Eye of Power podcast.
Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours.
Your bio is really interesting, Pamela. I mean, you're a marketing expert. You've been all around the world. You're a global citizen at a fairly young age, very accomplished. So, some of the things that I thought might be of interest to the Eye of Power audience, which is about seeing our power, increasing our agency, more of what we can do, figuring out the ways that we hold ourselves back, that sort of thing. My guess is you might have some wisdoms and some golden nuggets to share along those lines. So I'd like to move in that direction. So what is it about yourself that you've been so driven to do so many things and to be as accomplished you are in as short a period of time as you have?
Yeah, so I think like early on, I had, I experienced a lot of like trauma, and that shaped me a lot. And I also grew up without, remembering hearing words like I love you or a lot of praise. Like I was often criticized. And so what ingrained itself in my mind is that, hey, I need to prove myself in order to be worthy to be loved, right? Which of course isn't healthy. And I mean, I've practiced this before in like relationships or, in the professional world. And it brought me to very amazing places on the one hand, right? But I also came to the realization about 3 to 4 years ago that it's not always healthy to have a drive that purely stems from a scarcity point of view. And so I've now started to like turn that around and to, look at what's my positive motivation here. And I think the other aspect, Tom, is that I just have a feeling that life at the end feels very short. So I rather want to live it the best possible way. And so I live it in a way that any point in time when I look back, I do not have any regrets.
What a great realization to have at an early stage of our life because the natural thing is, a week seems like an eternity when we're a kid. A 5-minute timeout is torturous because 5 minutes seems to be the whole day. Then as we get life experience piled up behind us, those minutes seem shorter and shorter and shorter as compared to our lived experience. So to have that kind of realization early on in your journey is quite a useful thing, I'd say. So congratulations on that. So how does that manifest in terms of your outlook, in terms of, how you take on, say, your role as a marketing expert, let's just say?
Yeah, so I think like early on when I started my ad agency, which has been more than 8 years ago by now, almost 9 years, I wanted to make sure that we deliver really high quality services because when I left Google, I felt that, there were so many fish in the sea already and kind of like, what difference am I here to make? But what I noticed quickly is that there's very few people who actually do good work in the realm of like paid ads. And I mean, just yesterday, one of my clients, like, people are horrible, like responding to emails. Like, I would work with somebody for a month or two and I would have to wait for like a week or two for a response. And so that's like why like a lot of people prefer apps like Slack and so on, but like we don't use them at all. We just stick with email. And he was like, "But you're so responsive, like we're not gonna need that, right?" And I'm not talking about immediately responding, right? Like I'm very, very conscious about that. But that's just one of the aspects where I'm like, there's different ways to deliver quality in the way that you'd want it. And one of those, for example, is communication and transparency with clients. And kind of like walking the talk in that regard is extremely important to me.
That responsiveness, it's amazing to me how often we encounter where, the people that we're hiring to help us, I don't know what the paradigm is, honestly, that makes it seem okay that you can just go unanswered. Like you said, it doesn't have to be immediate, but if you can't respond in a detailed manner, at least acknowledge, say, "Hey, listen, I'm working on this thing," or, "I saw your message," or, busy the rest of the day. Is it okay if we circle back tomorrow? Anything like that that just makes it so that you're telling the person that you care and you're engaged and you're available to them, right?
Yeah, it's honestly, I could probably go on hours about this. And thankfully, I've been able to surround myself with people, especially my team, who are somehow aligned with how I think in that regard. And I think otherwise I couldn't work with them.
Right.
And I think, it's one of the easiest things of how you can add value to other people's lives because one thing I figured out is like most clients don't expect you to know everything. They just expect you to be there to help you. And if you don't know something, just say you'll figure it out and give them a rough timeline and then follow up, right? I mean, nothing easier than that.
So, what do you think it is that causes people who are out there providing services to be unresponsive or to think it's okay to put their agenda above the agenda of their people that have hired them?
I think on the one hand, it's not being able to organize one's email properly. I think a lot of people just never manage that. And for me, like I've just found a system over the years of how to manage my emails in a very efficient way. So that pretty much I always make sure I get back to them. And I tell my people like if it happens that I miss an email and you do not get a response within 48 hours from me, then please do push it up again in my inbox. But that happens maybe, I don't know, once every 6 months or so, right? Because
Okay.
like I've accepted I'm a human being and might overlook things as well sometimes, right? And the other aspect is I think insecurity and not knowing how to deal with certain information. And especially these days, like compared to like 15, 20 years ago, it's much easier to like ignore someone, right? Rather than saying, hey, you know what, let's hop on a call. Let's, like, do you have time for a 5-minute chat? And I've seen over and over again that every single time the personal interaction beats the written communication because there's so much misunderstanding that can happen in written communication. But like I get it when people are afraid, but also like there are solutions for that. And I think you have a certain responsibility if you want to be paid for a certain outcome or want to be paid a certain sum.
One of the things that I saw in your bio, Pamela, was the idea of, I don't know if you didn't really use the term work life balance, but what you were saying is not being in the grind, right? Not feeling like your responsibilities, professional or otherwise, are eating up too much of your life so that you don't have the room for the other passions that we might have. So, talk a little bit about that, how it works for you and how you got to that.
Yeah, so the two most important decisions that people usually make in their life is their partner and the work, right? Because these are the two aspects we spend most of our time with. But very few people really make conscious choices around these aspects. And so what I want people to understand is if you choose a work where you overwork yourself, where you're constantly stressed, where you don't like your colleagues, you might not even like your boss, and so on, you are going to be in a constant stress mode. And that stress mode is going to be detrimental for your health. It causes chronic pain, allergies, and so on. Like I could go on, the list is long, right? And then I go back to saying, okay, how do you want to live life? Is this how you want to live life? Like, do you want to live life stressed and, with health issues? Or do you want to live life happily and healthily and actually doing the things you love? And the beautiful thing is that these days, now more than ever, we have a choice of how we want to live our life. Like, there's so many different ways on how to make money. It's ridiculous. And I've gotten exposed to that part of my work at Google already and then afterwards because I've seen so many different businesses. Like, I always tell people there's very few industries, and I shall not name them here right now,
Mhm.
that I haven't worked with and I don't want to work with. But other than that, I've literally worked with every single industry that's out there. So, like, any way you wanna live life, it's possible.
I mean, is that driven mainly by sort of the technological revolution that shrinks the world, that we can do what we're doing now, and then we of course have the force multiplier capacities of AI, automation, things of that nature. Different sort of partnerships that are available. This fractionalization of the workforce, let's say, are these the kinds of things that you're talking about when you point in that direction, Pamela?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, now, you can just get on Alibaba and start contacting suppliers in China, and you can create your website here with somebody from, I don't know, Mexico, right? Like, you can get the best talent wherever, and that's extremely advantageous. And so you can communicate with people all around the world in a light speed, and that makes opportunities possible that are just unlimited.
Some of this, I know for myself, being, building various businesses, it can be somewhat daunting. I think you pointed towards perhaps an answer for the question I'm going to ask you already when you mentioned about the email system. But it seems to me like if you're going to take less of your time up, you need to replace that with efficiency and systems and organization or leverage with either tools or people to replace that so that we can maintain a value equation. So can you shed some light about what are some of the tips and possibly some of the pitfalls, as somebody would sort of set sail into these waters that you're describing?
Yeah, so I'm pretty non-negotiable with unsubscribing or subscribing to stuff. So I'm very, very careful when I provide my email and which email I provide. So I do have different emails for different purposes. I think I have about 7 or 8 different ones. And monitoring these is fairly easy. I have a MacBook, so I just use the Apple Mail system for that. And if I get anything I don't like, I just unsubscribe it. My inbox, my rules. So yeah, if anybody doesn't like that, that's their problem. I don't always manage to, but ideally, I wanna get to a point where I check emails 3 times a day because I've noticed that that is very productive for me. It's just sometimes we have emails that take 5 minutes to respond, and sometimes we have emails that take an hour to respond. That
Mhm.
makes that sometimes a little bit difficult, right? For me at least still. And the other aspect is if I look at my emails, I try to be really conscious with my time and not just like look at it during a call. Like I've noticed what even happens to me is sometimes during a call, I would glance over to my emails and I would start reading them, which of course isn't ideal because I cannot multitask. I think most people cannot. And I don't give them proper attention. So I really try hard to just focus on the call, on the meeting at hand, the task at hand. Sometimes I even close my emails and then open them up again when I do have time to respond to them and get back to them.
So that addresses the what would you say, the input of requests of your time, right? Because that's the modality that in your role, people reach out to you most via that. It's not that they're texting or calling you.
No, I've honestly pretty much reduced the use of my phone number, partially because it's half of the year not reachable when I'm abroad, which is very convenient. And secondly, I do use WhatsApp, but I'm also very strict with WhatsApp use for just personal purposes. So even if a client messages me there, I typically tell them to, keep it with email because I've just seen that that's much healthier for me. And so I think I'm just really strict with my boundaries. Enforcing those helps me do not just more focus, but like better work and better output for our clients.
I imagine that when you say you're strict with boundaries, that also pertains to setting expectations for people, right? Sometimes we can paint ourselves into the corner of saying, "Oh yeah, I'll get to that. I'll get that right out to you," wanting to serve and help, right? When we then don't realize, "Oh, wait a minute, I had 2 other things I had to do before that, and now I'm late on and all I had to do is say it's gonna be next week," right? So, is that some of the equation too?
Yeah, and I typically do not say anything that I can't deliver. So I'm
Yeah.
very, very conscious with my words because I know what that means to people. Like, I know that just walking your talk is the easiest way to build up trust for someone. And that's why quite some of our clients have been with us for years, right? Because they know they can rely on what I say. And if for like the rare instance there's anything that I cannot deliver or, I'm late on the deadline that I communicated, I let them know, right? And I think it also comes back to like practicing what I preach, like what do I like and how do I like to work with people? And so I like to reflect that in, any kind of outside engagement that I have.
You put yourself through a master's of psychology. Was this after you were working at Google or while you were there? Or
Yeah, it was afterwards, and
okay,
it was kind of like always my dream to do a degree at Harvard, but I couldn't afford it when I was a 16, 17-year-old just getting into university, or I didn't even know back then how it was like getting scholarships. And so, yeah, I mean, this was like 16 years ago. The internet was way different back then.
Mhm.
So I finally had this time where I couldn't just apply, but I also had the financial resources to afford it without necessarily having to get a scholarship, and to do it kind of like in my own terms without having to necessarily move to Boston. As much as I like Boston, I don't like it in the winter. It's too cold for me.
I went to school in Boston, so I know I lived that experience myself, and it was cold, man. Going to classes in the winter was rough. Yeah.
I can't do that. It's too much for me.
So what I was going to ask out of that was, what did so you'd already been established in career path, really, and then you add a master of psychology at Harvard at the top of that. How did that infuse, enhance, expand your view of the marketplace and people and your role in that space?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work in the personal development space over the past 15, 16 years. And I've tried out, all kinds of different modalities, read a lot about consumer behavior, behavior change, behavioral psychology, and all of that. And so I just wanted to add that academic credibility where, sometimes people, when you just talk about experience, people tend to discredit that a bit and say, "Oh, it's just one experience," right? So, but I wanted to be able to say, "No, it's not just one experience. What I've been doing, what I'm doing is actually based on XYZ amount of studies," right? So, I'll give you one example. Like there is an energy healing work that's called Reiki, and a lot of people would call it woo woo, but there's literally been a study done in 2019 with over 1,100 Reiki sessions, and each single one of them brought a positive improvement in terms of less anxiety, less depression, and healing all kinds of like chronic pain, right? So I want to be able to communicate that and show that to people that, hey, there's different opportunities out there to think about things and to work with them, and they're all available because people sometimes tend to have this very much tunnel view, right? Where they only see what they know, and that can limit them as well in their lives. And we do the same with our clients where we kind of help them see beyond what they know so that they can then grow their business beyond, for example, sometimes Google ads, beyond meta ads, and so on.
So what I hear you answer that way, Pamela, is that with the academic background of a Harvard master's in psychology, when you suggest something, a person who might otherwise poo-poo the idea is more likely to say, "Okay, this is probably based on something that is accepted, standard academic practice." Like, and you get a little bit more buy-in from that. Is it? Did I understand that right?
Yeah, you could say so. And I've had a very fascinating observation just last week where I spoke at a conference. And I spoke on the subject of how, like, why better performance equals less work and how you can achieve better performance with working less, right? The science and data behind that. And I offered people, I think, 6 to 7 data points and studies that showed that, right? Why we should do that and why we should work less and how that leads to better performance. And then I led them to through a short meditation at the end and a breath practice. And all the people remembered in the end was in the one hand that they cried, which was good, which was an outcome I kind of hoped for, that something would be released. And that that they did the meditation, the breath work. So that goes to show again, yes, we can work with all kinds of science data points, but we're such emotional human beings that what really makes us remember an experience or whatever data there is, it's the story and the emotions we connect with it.
You're singing my tune. I've part of the Eye of Power protocol. It's a model that helps us see that inner part of ourselves that remains hidden from our conscious minds. And the protocol is a set of lenses we look through. And the problem is that change and improvement is not really just an intellectual exercise, right? It's not that we don't know some things. It's that our emotionality is um, complicated around it, right? So we don't have a full picture of what's real and true within ourselves. We're very complicated, right? So what we think about, about ourselves is only the part of the iceberg that sticks up out of the water, and the rest of it remains out of view. And within that part that's out of view, there's lots of conflicting impulses, right? So you know this from your work, I'm sure. And so our task becomes to line those things up. So it seems to me like what you're pointing to when you talk about that less time and more space, really more space. It's allowing ourselves to have that flexibility to come into congruence because the it seems like it's the slavery of the to-do list is what I encounter in the world, right? Where the to-do list is longer than the hours that you have in the day, and that's true every day for everybody in the organization. And because of that, everybody has this background anxiety level that says, I don't have enough time for what I'm doing. And that's not psychologically the most empowering thing. I think that's what you're pointing to. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and that's something I observe almost every single time I sit down to try to meditate, where, I can observe how my mind literally starts coming up with like, you need to do this, you should do this, this,
Yeah.
this. And
It'll
when I
go,
then inquire more about that and be like, okay, where does it actually come from? It goes really deep into my parents, especially my mom's side, that always had to do the had to have the feeling that she was doing something. Like she wasn't being productive or good enough when she wasn't working, right? But especially as like human beings, what we need to understand is our brain is like our muscles. It only grows during like times of downtime and really downtime. Like, we often think we're having downtime, but we're not. Like, as an example, this was, I think, 2, 3 months ago by now when I had a session with one of my, you could say, counselors, and she was like, "Are you, like, close to burnout right now?" I was like, "No." She was like, "Are you working too much right now?" I was like, "No." She was like, "Is your mind working a lot right now?" I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. So we sometimes think we're not like doing anything, but like our mind is constantly going on and on and on about things. And that can cause stress levels as well that we often forget about.
I love that point, Pamela. I mean, it's that constant chatter, right? And it doesn't again, the theme that I'm getting from how you're sharing these things is the word that comes to mind is space. Because when we have that constant gerbil wheel going, whether it's physical or mental, doesn't really matter. It's just not leaving space for the deeper parts of ourselves to emerge. And those deeper parts of it's like this. It's like I was having a really cool conversation last week with a friend of mine. He's the kind of friend that we both like to go philosophical and deep, and so we get into these great conversations. And we were talking about it's like if most people were sitting with at this table with us, they wouldn't be engaged because they wouldn't want to do the work of going down that far. And he is a leader of a fairly large team, and he sometimes has that frustration where people don't want to work things through the mental. I said, "You're a smart guy, right? So it's easy for you to hold a bunch of things in your conscious mind and continue the path down that." And I said, "Not everybody, their conscious mind doesn't work that way, but it doesn't mean that it's not in there, right? So it's not necessarily that IQ piece because our brains do retain everything that we are exposed to. And it's just whether we can retrieve it and put it into articulation is the variable that creates this spectrum of what we'd say a smart person versus a non-smart person might be. But I think it's that space that we're pointing to that allows that inarticulated wisdom that's I think in I mean, unless there's actual brain damage or things that are physically wrong, it's in there and it comes through that side that maybe might not be verbal, that might not be that. And I think it's that space we need to allow that wisdom to bubble forth to respect that. And I think that's maybe perhaps some of what you're observing. Am I out in left field or are we aligned on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when we talk about space, it's not just like physical space, the space on your own. one thing that I've noticed in the past year that for me feels like my space is being invaded is when other people are having their phones on loud, when they're watching
Oh
stuff on
boy.
loud, when they're having calls on loud on like public transport. Like there is a lack of like almost like respect for somebody else's space. And I've noticed how these things impact me and how I feel, right? So I know like certain airlines have already started saying, hey, if you're watching something, then please use a headset. In certain areas of public transport, they've already started, communicating that. So I think it's really important for people to keep into consideration space isn't always just physical, it's mental. And we need to understand what mental space means for us and what we need.
The word that stood out there to me, Pamela, is respect, because respect is something that is probably the most valuable and sometimes the most rare thing we see in the. Now, I focus a lot of times when we're talking on this podcast a lot in the world of the workplace. What you just pointed to was just the world in general being out there, and so whether you're at work or whether it doesn't matter where you are, what does it mean to be respectful, and why does that matter? In the eye of power world, what we talk about with respect is just simply recognizing the value of people, right? That they have a space in the world just like you do, and they have a walk that's unique to them. They have insights that you don't have, and respect is just simply being aware and acknowledging that there's something there that's worthy, that is deserves our at least our consideration, if not our time.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add on to that is the understanding that we all share a common space. And, it would be nice to have a beautiful common space. And
Yeah.
so it's our responsibility to keep it that way, right? So when I walk on the street, I probably don't want to find a street that's full of trash. When I walk into an office, I don't want to find the dirty dishes there, right? So, and it's the same as like at home, at home I clean my stuff. So I try to treat every place in as much as possible as if it was my home, right? So the simple things, if I spill something, I wipe it. If I drop something, I pick it up, and so on. And those things go a really, really long way.
You were pointing towards sort of noise pollution. What's your view on, like, so somebody, let's say, driving in a car and they've got their stereo jammed to you can hear for a mile around the thump of the bass, right? What's your view of sort of the balance between, because, from their perspective, they like their music loud and they're in their private space and, tough. Or, and then from another point of view is, look, you're driving past I'm recording a podcast, you're driving past my house and you're encroaching on my space, and you're not aware of it or whatever. But there's a balance between that sort of shared space that you pointed to and the personal freedoms to live the life that we would like to live. How do you navigate those sorts of opposing forces, Pamela?
Yeah, I think personal space goes so far in terms of what I can do and where it does not influence the other person, right? So, yes, you can have the music as loud as you like, but if it starts impacting other people and other people hear it, then there is a boundary to that, right? And I think you should be respectful with that because the same thing would count for themselves. Like, I always try to help people understand, hey, if somebody did this to you, if you were recording a podcast and somebody drove by and like with loud music, you wouldn't like it either, right? But I think a lot of people, or if not most people, lack that understanding that, hey, if somebody else did that to me, would I like that? And that's something I'm really grateful for that my parents instilled in me, where they always tend to toss that back. It was not a comfortable question. I didn't like it, but it really helped me understand sort of like, being a responsible human being or citizen.
Well, that's sort of ancient wisdom right there. That's the golden rule. So that's pretty good advice on that front of it. So I'm getting a theme of respect, of space, of both outward and inward, because when you say like that not working yourself to death on your bio, you were pointing to the sort of the 30-hour work week. And that's by definition giving yourself space, right? You're not you're each day has room in it for whatever priorities may come in. So, how would you coach or counsel people who are trying to make their way because you've got other people's expectations. And let's face facts, most people, when you're hired, they're not expecting 30 hours. A lot of places that I'm working with, they expect double that. And so, and some people give triple. And if you want to get to the top of the ladder, that's the paradigm. They think it's going to take that. And, some people are willing to pay that price, others aren't. But um, how would you sort of guide and coach people as they consider those external realities, Pamela?
So I would help them understand where does the current behavior come from, right? If they work a lot, why do you work a lot? And that can often go very deep, sometimes decades of history there, right? So really understanding what the root is here. And then also why you're being stressed. Like I always try to tell people is like, you're not stressed because of your coworkers. You're not stressed because of your children or your spouse or, anybody else. You are stressed because there's something triggering you that you have allowed to happen over and over again, right? And I think that's why we also need to understand the responsibility that we put ourselves in certain situations. Nobody else makes the decisions for our lives unless we allow that, right? So, next, I also need to understand how do I want to live life, right? Am I okay with working 60, 80 hours a week? Go for it. But I would argue that most people who say that are lying to themselves. They just
Mm.
don't know any better. They just don't have the belief or even haven't seen examples that there's a better way out there, right? And then I would examine, what am I afraid of if I work less? Like a lot of times there's fear, right? And that can be attached to the ego. Am I in the path where I'm expecting to get a promotion because that's the thing to do? Or, do I feel like I'm expected to work a lot? Do I feel like I'm expected to not say anything? And depending on what the case is, I also encourage people to say something, right? To have that conversation with their bosses. Because to be honest, most managers and bosses are not aware of how much every single one of their employees work. They just give you work and hope that you're going to get it done. And probably oftentimes would also argue, hope that you say something if you can't, right?
Hmm.
And typically when you voice your boundaries, especially if you deliver value, I've never seen anybody have an issue with that. Because companies starting to understand that their employees can only do good work if they feel good and healthy themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a welcome trend in the world where we're starting to understand it's the whole human, right? It's not just that transactional. You have this skill, I pay you this money to provide this particular deliverable, which is sort of been the currency in the world throughout all of history, really.
Yeah.
And I think we're having this sort of emergent, perhaps higher place that says, wait a minute here, what matters and what matters more than what? And we can sort of go up whether it's the Maslow hierarchy of needs or whatever other model you want to point to, we can start to realize, wait a minute, especially in the world that's emerging with automation, right? Where if it's just a straight out task that can be automated, it's gonna be automated.
Mhm.
So so now, okay, what's the world of work mean, right? When it's not necessarily just those mundane tasks anymore. What does it mean to be employable, to work as a team, to add value in the world? So this is a challenge that I think that we're all looking at and wondering about and wrestling with. What's your view on that macro level, would you say, Pamela?
Honestly think it's going in a good direction because our brain anyway doesn't do well with just mundane tasks. It needs challenges in order to grow and in order to develop. So, if the most mundane tasks can be taken over by automation, why not? We find so much more joy in doing things where we have to think a little bit, where we have to figure something out. Like actually overcoming challenges doesn't just make us happier, but it also makes us stronger, right? And
Yeah.
so, even if these times are sometimes not easy, they're extremely important to our overall long term happiness.
You've lived that yourself, right? I saw in your bio that you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I think it was one of these experiences that just shows you that you can do whatever you want as long as you prepare for it in your mind. Like 3 weeks before climbing, I got sick.
Oh, really?
And so I couldn't really prepare physically as much as I wanted. Although I will say I'm a generally sportive person, so I tend to do sports regularly. But still, like I've never climbed a mountain that high and that long, right? So it's 7 days of like extended walking, so to speak, depending on which route you take, but I took the 7-day one.
Okay.
And in the early morning of day 6, like pretty much shortly after midnight, what you do is you start the ascent to the top. And that takes somewhere between 5 to 7 hours, depending on how fast you are. But the thing is, you can only walk very slowly because the air is so thin.
Right.
So you have to practice patience, like you have to practice proper breathing. And then you get up there and you understood that either any fear you had wasn't in your, that wasn't relevant. And secondly, that you can really do it as long as you put your mind to. And one of the key things I think that I did that I visualized not having any problems with like, what's it called? Like altitude sickness. And, that's one thing that a lot of people complained about before, so I knew that that was something possible, and I countered it with visualizing the opposite, right? So whenever people tend to talk about fearful things, I focus on the opposite, and that helps me immensely, and that also helped me with Kilimanjaro.
Well, I loved how you related that story because there were parallels between your mindset and how you experienced that adventure and all the other things we've been talking about our professional lives and our work. It's there were numerous things about that, the mindset, the leaving space, being patient in terms of that, making sure you're aware of the surroundings. And I think that's an important thing. When we're in that hustle bustle, patience tends to not be the thing that emerges, right? We're just going, 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 and we're not, you know, the casualties when we're in that do modality are things like patience and respect and awareness and just being present in the moment, right? We're just sort of on we can get where we're just on autopilot running a program, and that's not quite the center of the bullseye as it relates to the point of being human, right?
Not at all, and I think, the one aspect that I keep doing, which takes me out of that ordinary aspect and getting used to stuff, is traveling. So I just frequently put myself into different situations, different locations, and that helps me to, like, not be caught up for too long in doing something over and over again. It helps me to question certain things that I've been doing. And I think that's very valuable because sometimes, people get stuck in a job for like 3, 5, 10, 20 years and they think that's normal. They think that that is life. But there's so much more beyond that. And literally, the only thing that's keeping us from that is fear, right? And that fear is about something that's never going to happen. Like in 99% of the cases, if you look back at your life, you'll notice that, hey, whatever fear I had hasn't come true.
So true. We talk a lot about that in the eye of power, in what I call it the pain quadrant. Consternation is a type of fear that you're pointing to there that holds us in place where we create scenarios and we're worrying about them, and therefore it slows us or stops us from taking that step forward. So it's a major way that we lose our personal power, our agency in the world. As you talked about that being sort of the person you said you were in 100 countries. So you're obviously you like to travel and you're comfortable putting yourself in different surroundings. My wife and I are actually moving into that space now where we're now empty nesters, and I was in a band for a long time and I left the band so that we can do that kind of thing and be where we want to be. My business is going more virtual, so it doesn't matter where I am. And so we're kind of moving into that space. Didn't do it as early as you did in life, but I'm hoping to expand my horizons from just being sort of immersed in these different places and cultures. So, as somebody who's entering into that world, what if you could think of a kernel or of an observation or guidance that you could share about your experience that in the beginning of your journey you wish you knew, if you can think of anything like that, Pamela.
The one thing that always comes to my mind would be the world is a much safer place than you think. So do
It's much
not
safer.
much safer, it's a much safer
Safer.
place than you think. So do not let any news or whatever statements derail you from going to a country that you really want to go to. I I've had the most fabulous experiences in places that, people say they're war torn or there is a lot of hunger or whatever. Do things like this exist? Yes, absolutely. But there's also a whole lot of side of abundance and positive things that exists. And so I simply like try to really focus on the positive stuff and what kind of experience I want to have. And, worst case, if you don't feel comfortable somewhere, you can always leave, right? So there's, and I've been to countries where I said, you know what, I don't necessarily want to come back here, and that's okay, right? There's always going to be certain cultures, countries that going to gravitate more towards, right? And if not, you just learn something and have a story to tell. So, yeah.
Is there a surprise that you like? Is there a place that you didn't think you would love that you ended up loving or vice versa?
I think there were quite a lot of places where I was, like, hesitant in the beginning to go to, but then when I went, I had really great experiences, and some of those were Nigeria, Ghana, Pakistan, Jamaica, and I'm talking about seeing the non-touristy sides of these places,
Okay.
right? Vietnam, really positively surprised by that. Really, really liked it, like, even to the extent where people told me it's nice, but, like, it was even nicer. And, yeah, I think that those are some of the places that, left
Wonderful.
a good impression. South Africa, right? Like, a lot of people talk about South Africa like it's super dangerous. I could probably talk an hour about how that story comes to be, but it's a much safer place than people think.
Mm. Well, that's wonderful. So what are some of the horizons ahead for you? What are you looking forward to in the next phase of your life, would you say, Pamela?
I think at some point there's probably gonna come a little bit of settling down, as I'm entering kinda like that period of my life, but I'll always keep traveling to some extent. I'm just looking to see how far we can grow the impact with the ad agency, as well as, with like this new business I'm slow building in the personal development space. And yeah, just hoping that I can show a lot of people that whatever they need is within themselves. They don't need to spend, hundreds, thousands of dollars on external stuff or external devices, but we really do have everything we need within ourselves. And once we discover that and once we learn how to work with that, oh gosh, everybody can have a much better life than they expected. So yeah, or can think
Well,
of.
I love that. That's a great message. Anything you'd like to add as a way of sort of wrapping up? If somebody wants to know more about you or want to partake of how you offer value in the world, can you give some guidance as to what you might tell people about that?
Sure. So if you are a 6 to 8 plus figure business and you are tired of having to manage ads or ads that don't work, then obviously we can help with that. We've helped over 3,000 businesses grow with ads. So there is pretty much nothing we haven't seen, and all that with full transparency and proper communication, right? For that, you can go to ajala.digital.com. So that's AJALA and then the word digital.com. And if you are more interested in the personal development side, then the website is called hustlelesslivemore.com. And we've tons of articles for you up there to read, tons more stuff coming. And that's going to like helping you to reduce that stress and see new ways of how to live a happy and healthier life.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Pamela. It's been lovely to get to know you a little bit, and I love the journey you're on, and I find a lot of inspiration in what you said there today. So, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us on the Eye of Power.
Thank you too, Tom. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Pamela, for being my guest today. I very much enjoyed our time together and your generous sharing of your experience so far. And I'm motivated to get out there and experience more of the world based on your story and what you're able to share with us. So I'm looking forward to being able to circle back and share some of those experiences with you and others, and really drink all there is of this world up is some of the things that I got from our discussion, and leaving space and for ourselves, for other people, get off that crazy wheel of the constant doing, and just learning to have the maturity and wisdom to be in the world and experience what life has to offer. And to realize that at a young age, I think is fantastic. And it's never too late because I'm happy to start right now in my sort of later years. So wherever you are in the world, you can always move forward from there. So thank you for listening to Pamela and I discuss the world of space, the world of respect, the world of being and the world of just getting off the craziness and allowing yourself to live in love. Talk to you soon.
This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com.